Welcome to Green and Gold FC. We have a capital football themed episode this week. I am joined by my usual co-host Alex, and we unfortunately were missing you last week because we need a bit of a rant about Segacic. How are you going, Alex?
Oh, I'm doing very well. Look, I'd say maybe it's probably a good thing. For the sake of our professionalism on this podcast, maybe it's a good thing that I wasn't on last week for a good old rant about Tony Popovich and his shenanigans. But excited to be back covering a very important topic in Australian football today, and yeah, very excited to be joined by Aaron and Nick today.
How are you going, Aaron?
Yeah, good, thanks. So my name's Aaron Hazelton, and I'm the Vice President for Monera Panthers. So, yes, looking forward to having a bit of a conversation today, just about the current state of play and some of the sport in the area that's affecting us at the moment.
And finally, Nick, who you might know as Nickabel on Green and Gold FC. I believe you also have a Reddit profile as well, and you've been really the advocate for getting the word out about what's going on in capital football. How are you going, Nick?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. Good to finally have this chat. There's quite a few bit of things to unpack, both across Canberra and a lot of regional New South Wales affected by, just say decisions for now, but we'll get to that a bit later.
All right, let's first start with a bit of news, and we'll go into the interview part of the episode in a few minutes. But first of all, the under-20s have landed in Chile. We are looking forward to a big campaign from them. It's been a long time since we've been excited about an under-20 team having a chance. Of course, we have the group of death, but you never know. What do you guys reckon? Do you think that this group is just too hard, or you got your hopes up?
I personally am very excited. Look, we saw a lot of promising signs from this under-20 squad at the Asian Cup. I'm hoping we're going to be able to follow it through. This is a good squad. A number of players have just got their first sort of big moves to Europe and stuff like that. You look at the likes of Pim and you look at the likes of, Benny coming through as well. So it's a very exciting squad. Definitely a lot of promising signs. Obviously, group of death going to be very tough. Do I see us getting out of the group? Probably not. But look, the fact that we've even made an under-20s World Cup is something that we've been striving for so long in this country. So to see the boys be able to get it done in the Asian Cup was fantastic. And look, hopefully they can defy expectations. Hopefully they can get some upset results. Maybe we even get through the group stage. I'm not going to say we're going to win the whole thing because, quite frankly, I don't want to embarrass myself too much. But I think the boys will put on a bit of a better performance than a lot are expecting.
And then we have the under-17s who just completed a tour of Japan. They lost 3-1 to a regional team. They also lost 4-0 today, but they beat Wales 2-1. I am told that we are a year younger. This is a different goal for us compared to Japan. Japan are preparing for their U17 World Cup, which we missed out on. But we are our team is essentially preparing for next year's qualification. Are we concerned here? This is Carl Viert's first game in charge. Particularly the 3-1 loss against a regional team, this is not pretty results, but there might be mitigating circumstances here.
It's under 17s football. You can't really judge too much on player performance and stuff like that. I know a lot of people are going to panic and say, oh, but we're losing games and stuff like that. But, they're friendly games on, random tours. I don't think we should be reading too much into it. And look, nice to get a little win against Wales there. I think we're always going to be inferior to Japan at this sort of national youth level. So, look, if people want to make the point that we need to use this as an example of why we need to invest more in youth football, I'm happy to draw that from it. But in terms of performance, I don't think there's too much to be concerned about.
I'm definitely on team panic because, that's half of what football is. It's overreacting to every single result, which happens in the game. Okay, next we have this week, we have ACL and ACL2. Melbourne City start tomorrow. We'll know the result by the time this gets out, and then ACL2 start on Thursday. I love the ACL2 format. It's a format with good enough prize money, and we have a realistic chance of winning, but it's not a sure thing. And the ACL is just been hard lately. Obviously, last year was particularly hard with Central Coast. I'm glad we have a regular, consistent performer in Melbourne City this year. It is the top 8 which make it, so that seems more achievable than top 2 in a group. Yeah, how do you look at their draw for both teams?
Very, very tough draw. Very, very tough draw in the opening few games for Melbourne City, I'd say. I'd say Sanfrecce Hiroshima is going to be a tough game for them. Look, I think any sort of Japanese side or Korean side are always going to, be the ones that you look at and say, okay, those are the games where you have to be winning. Those are the games where you're sort of they're do or die in terms of whether you're finishing in that top 8 or not. And obviously, that's because those are the main sides that you're going to be competing with, those ultra competitive, consistent sides that always, seem to perform well against us in Asia. Look, I don't necessarily think that City are going to have an easy time with it. I do think that there are some good enough, opportunities for, I won't say easy wins because you never get easy wins in Asia, but you're going to have teams from the likes of Vietnam and countries like that where you should realistically be getting wins. I do think once again Japan and Korea are going to be our biggest battlers at this point. So hopefully City can get the job done. They've got a decent squad. I haven't been too overly impressed with their transfer business, if I'm being completely honest, but I think they'd probably have a good enough squad to get top 8. I'm gonna hold out hope that they do manage to get it done.
It is very important for our coefficient, which is under pressure. We could lose an ACL spot if we're not careful. Next on to overseas Aussies. Sam Kerr is back for Chelsea. She is scoring. Sapsford, I've been watching, and he's been unbelievable. So is Tilio for Rapid. And incredibly, Quoll is back. To be honest, he was as rusty as Holden Kingswood, but I was still just absolutely thrilled to see him after so much time away, to see him back.
I think a lot of people are judging his move to the Czech Republic too harshly. Look, Sparta are a really good team. I think he's going to get some very valuable minutes there. Always the potential of him potentially playing in Europe as well. So there's, that we have to keep an eye on as well. Look, obviously he's going to be rusty. It's been a while since he's played senior club football. Hopefully he gains some good momentum. Hopefully we see him back in a Socceroos camp soon. As for Sam Kerr, good to see her back with a goal. I definitely feel like the Matildas are relying a lot on her. I'm hoping with Montemuro, definitely we're going to be able to see some more dynamic play to the point where we don't have to rely on sheer Sam Kerr brilliance to be able to get results against inferior teams, because quite frankly, that's how it seemed for a long time now with the Matildas. But yeah, look, good to see Sam back on goal scoring form, and Zach Sapsford once again. I don't know how this man wasn't selected for the most recent Socceroos camp, but
He was injured.
He's just on great form. He's just on great form right now. So, look, if he can stay injury-free, I definitely see him as someone who could possibly get selected for a camp before the World Cup. I don't see him necessarily as a starter or an impact player, but, if he continues this form for Dundee, there's no reason why he should be out of Tony Popovic's sight for too long.
Yeah, I have to say about Sapsford, normally players go to Europe and even in Scotland, they have less time and space, they have trouble touching the ball, and usually it's their quality on the ball which helps them bridge that gap and stay swimming, treading water until they adapt to the less time and space. But Sapsford, his touches per 90 have gone up, and his build-up play, particularly in transition, it reminds me of Mitch Duke during that purple patch he had around the World Cup, where every single flick around the corner is finding the player, it's perfect weight, and you're like, where did this player come from? He's on the bench for Japanese second-tier side. And, Sapsford, he seems to have gone up a level since he's been at the Wanderers. So I'm really looking forward to see how he develops. Let's go to the meat of the episode. So we're going to cover, many people have seen and heard rumors and snippets about what's happening with Ugali FC, but also just generally in capital football in general. The elephant in the room is we can't get Ugali here. They want to come on, but we can't get Ugali here. And we haven't heard back from Capital Football. So unfortunately, we don't have them on the pod yet, but we're hoping to get them on later. But we need to bring light to the situation. So let's start with what happened. I think we'll start with Nick, who's been periodically updating everyone who will listen on what's happening right now with Ugali. He's, of course, written an article on Green and Gold FC for those who are interested. So Nick, can you give us a summary about what's happened and a big overview about what happened to Ugali FC?
Yeah, so essentially earlier this year, Capital Football released a review of the NPL competitions, and that goes across both senior men's, senior women's, youth boys, youth girls, and there's a raft of changes, essentially summarising it from a Western New South Wales side of things. There's 2 Riverina clubs outside of Canberra, so one based in Wagga and one based in Griffith, which is Ugali Soccer Club, and they're effectively being removed from the senior competitions. Ugali doesn't run any junior program in Canberra, and Wagga does run a junior program. The review's sort of been panned across by a few different avenues. Again, speaking just from the Riverina perspective, there seems to have been a lack of consultation, despite there being, stated as such by Capital Football in their review. But essentially, it comes across that there's a sort of a bubble that's sort of forcing out regional areas. Aaron's on board today from Monaro Panthers because they're going to be affected on this at a junior level. They've got a wide catchment area, east of Canberra. That access to top level football is going to be cut as well.
So Ugali aren't the only club which has been affected here. It's also Aaron. We know some of the other regional clubs are potentially being affected. Could you tell us about that, Aaron?
Yeah, so obviously Monaro Panthers, we do border pretty close to Canberra, but we do cover the whole kind of area from Canberra all the way down the east coast and quite a large regional patch as well. And we've got an MOU with our sister club Bella Monaro as well in the female kind of NPL space, and they get a lot of people kind of even as far as Goulburn and kind of all that eastern area of New South Wales. So we have a huge catchment. We as a club are probably sitting just shy of 1,000 players. So it's quite a large club. And I suppose the key for us is, one thing that we've been lobbying pretty hard for, and we're still lobbying for, we're still in there, we're still putting up the fight, is just the time, I suppose. As Nick alluded to, the Capital Football Review came out and it's a lot of things in it. There's a lot to digest. We're still digesting it, as I'm sure as every other club is still doing it. But there's so much criteria that the clubs need to meet. Now, I'm all for criteria. Like, I'm all for setting the bar high. Let's set the standards high. Let's do it. But I think the disconnect here is the time between the review and the time between implementation is just not enough time to actually implement the bits that are seen more important of the day, if that makes sense. There's so much rules. Like, we are so lucky that we've got a great backing behind QPRC Regional Council. We've got a multi-million-dollar sports facilities just up the road from where I live. When Lebanon came to play against Australia, they trained at our home grounds. Like, we've got amazing facilities, right? So each club is investing all this time and energy into different parts. We've been putting all this time in our seniors. We've been putting all this time in developing our girls' youth programs. We've been putting all this time into amazing facilities. We've been putting all this time into our junior base. We in the NPL boys space, we've just been rebuilding the teams and we've had some success. Yes, we would like a bit more success across all the age groups, but it's very tough, to go, you're back in that space, our 13s going into 14s NPL boys are very competitive. We are competitive on the pitch. There's none of these 20-0 losses or 10-0 losses or anything like that. It's all competitive football. And the one key that, we just keep lobbying for, there's got to just be a bit of uniformity. There's got to be a bit of a pause to allow all the clubs to all be competing the same playing field. If we sit there and go, right, I say to Capital Football, lock it for 2 years, let everyone in who wants to be in and set the rules that you want and give the clubs time to comply and conform with it. And that's really what everyone needs in the region.
So I'll direct this question first to Nick and then to Aaron. Now, there's obviously a lot of criteria based on clubs outside of the ACT actually trying to play in the ACT NPL system. Now, do you know what these criteria are, and do you think they're being too harshly enforced? Do you think that maybe they should be loosened a bit to allow clubs like Ugali to be able to operate inside of the NPL, or do you think it's being correctly enforced?
Personally, I think, like Aaron mentioned, it's good to have criteria set. My sort of pre-ramble of that is it appears that they're being not enforced widely across. There seems to be some clubs that are being given an exemption to meet this criteria and other clubs that aren't, given that opportunity and given that time to meet that criteria. And that's sort of, to me, a bit of an accountability and an integrity issue. But the requirements that they've got that Capital Football has stated are achieving 1-star status in an FA club changer program and working towards 2-star status by the end of next season. Registered non-for-profit organisation, having an SAP program in the under 11s, 12s and 13s, and a junior pathway program either in the NPL or in the Junior League Division 1, which is essentially the next step down in Canberra. A technical director with minimum qualifications, suitable qualified coaches, there's some financial requirements, and then field requirements as well, enclosed oval, technical area, other random things. That's it on the list. From a Griffith and Wagga perspective, there is a bit earlier on in the review that mentions that travel is an issue for those two clubs. Not so much for Monaro because they're largely based in Queanbeyan. It's essentially another suburb for Canberra for those who aren't aware of that. It's just over the border. Essentially, it's just straight up cut mentioned in the review that there's particularly an issue travelling to those areas with resources, particularly at a youth and community level.
Okay, so just to summarize, because there's a lot going on there. So Capital Football has introduced new regulations, and those regulations have been applied inconsistently, where if some clubs are given more time than others to fulfill those regulations. And on top of that, Ugali has an additional travel issue. So with Ugali, if they can't meet the regulations, they get kicked out of the NPL. But unlike other clubs where they might go to lower level, in their case, they will go to nowhere because the community football is a place where there's just too far travel to realistically travel from the capital city to Griffith. Is that a fair summary?
I would say essentially, yes. If you sort of apply a wide lens to it, that summarises it. Mostly spot on.
So let's start with the regulations, because this seems to be an issue at all levels of football. So A-League clubs are struggling with the minimum costs they have to have. The NST has been delayed indefinitely. We heard in our episode, please check it out, that they struggle because they were given regulations, these minimum standards they have to have, or there's going to be no home and away competition at all. When I did a deep dive into regulations of NPL, Victoria and New South Wales, I saw that those are the reasons why you have junior fees so high, because essentially very similar regulations to this. Once you have the minimum standards needed for coaches and technical directors and grounds, you end up having to have quite expensive junior fees. So I believe clubs in NPL2 Victoria, they're paying about $1,300 per kid, just goes to paying for coaches and technical directors because you need those minimum qualifications. Are we going to see a similar price hike in Capital Football because of these regulations? And are these do we have too much regulations? It seems to be hurting us at all levels of the game.
Look, if I kind of jump in here on this one, my kind of thoughts, as I said to you before, I think we should have high standards, and I think we should definitely have high standards. And if we look at the standards that we're trying to achieve out of the NPL review, and I say, look, from an end product perspective, the standards are high, and there's no issue with that. But yeah, as we speak about, there's just that time when clubs need to train up their staff, train up their coaches, get everyone involved to be able to achieve those standards. Currently, it's not uncommon for an NPL boy player in Canberra to pay between $1,400 to $1,800 to play, which is pretty, bit of money for a 14-year-old if you think about it that way. And look, the reality of it is more, SAP programs we put in place, it's gonna lead to additional costs. So, there are just additional challenges the clubs need to overcome, and we can't just kind of do it overnight, right? Like we've got to look at it and go, now we're gonna have to have 11 SAP, 12 SAP, and what the SAP is locally is, they play their regular games, they do training games of a week as well, and if you look at travel times, I know it's not as far as say Griffith, but a lot of them in our boys in Queanbeyan already travel over to Mackellar, which is a good kind of 30, 35 minutes. You're doing that on a weeknight when they've got school. As you can appreciate, it's just more involvement, which leads to more costs. So it's just a matter of, as the club, there's just challenges, and if you just compound all the challenges on top of each other, this is just why I keep, the message you're going to hear from me tonight is just time. People need time, set the standards high. You got to look at regulation differently. We're going to go, well, what are we trying to achieve from it? Let's talk about what we're trying to achieve and how we get there, opposed to trying to getting too many lines on a bit of paper to try to force the same thing.
So, Nick, I'll direct this next question to you. And I'm sure a lot of people, after we've read off that extensive list of regulations for clubs in the ACT NPL, I'm sure a lot of people will be wondering how these sort of regulations come to pass. Is this, directed down from Football Australia? Is this directed down from Capital Football? Were these regulations made with clubs like Ugali in mind, or were they sort of just passed down as a general rule? And I guess, why did this situation come to pass? Do clubs like Ugali or any other clubs in Capital Football have any sort of say in the matter, or is this sort of just a ruling that's passed down from Football Australia and there's not really much the clubs can do about it?
From my perspective, it's come across as, something's from Capital Football. This review there was a committee put together for this review. There's only 4 people on it, and my understanding is that's set by the board of Capital Football. I've tried looking into, how this has come about from what I've been drip fed from some clubs. The report talks about consultation, but from, people I've spoken to, from Ugali, from Wagga, from a couple of other clubs as well, there's seems to have been a lack of consultation. There was something floating around. Aaron's probably aware of it. The Ugali made it public before they got rid of it. There was a email sent through from a number of clubs asking for essentially what Aaron has said, asking for more time, a pause in the review to allow everyone to get their ducks in order. It appears that has not been, listened to or answered to, and there seems to be a lack of input. I've touched on this in my article that I've written for the website, that there's, only 4 people on this review. There's at least one person who is on this committee who is a current club committee member for another club. I won't say names, I won't say clubs here, because I don't want to get in trouble anymore, because I've got into trouble for that. There's no conflict of interest tabled in that review whatsoever about this club and this person. So from some clubs' perspective, there seems to be some clubs are writing rules for themselves to further themselves, and that puts other clubs back who want to have that ambition. And it's affecting, clubs at the senior level, clubs at the youth level. The youth NPL in Canberra is 14 clubs at the moment. That's going to be cut to 10. Between the 2 tiers of senior NPL and the second division in Canberra, that's 16. 6 clubs are going to be cut from that. There seems to be a very small amount of input affecting a large amount of clubs, essentially.
I think kind of one point I might just jump in there as well and mention is all the clubs have challenges, right? And the challenges are just in different areas. So some have challenges on having enough facilities at play. Some have challenges on junior programs. Some have challenges on the NPLB program. Some have challenges on the youth development of females. Like, everyone's got its challenges. Some have the NPL men. So I'm saying that there probably just needs to, we encourage more engagement with all the clubs, because if I'm here saying that every club's got challenges, and you kind of say you got a team of 4 people who are engaging, well, then the challenges that they have are the ones, where they're strong is going to be obviously coming through in the review. So this is human nature, right? I'm not pointing the finger at anyone for that. That's just what happens. So it just needs to get a broader engagement, get everyone on board and say, okay, how do we actually improve it? What's the outcome we want? And how do we lock that away and allow all the clubs to actually get there? Because that's really what we want, right? We don't want to no one wants clubs to be kicked out. We don't want to see clubs kicked out. Our local rivals, we love the little, Crimean Derby when we play them. What we wouldn't want to see them kicked out. You know what I mean? Gives us something to do every few Saturday nights. So there's a part about it where you just got to go, well, let's actually lift the standard. Let's help everyone get there. And because that's really what it should be about, right? Like, as I said to you before, youth football is probably the most played sport in Australia. But by the time it gets under 12s, under 13s, we lose too many kids to other sports and everything like that. We should be actually strengthening the clubs. We should be supporting all the clubs. then what that's going to mean, that's more athletes, that's better footballers. That's, they're going to come through the system more competitive. So that's really what we should be aiming for here. And you're not going to get that without more engagement and more conversations and more time to kind of turn it from a rule book. And again, I say this not to be disrespectful to the cause, but let's talk about what we're trying to achieve out of it, and let's work out how to get there, opposed to looking at it from a perspective of going, well, this is how we're going to kind of police part of it, because you can't. It's very hard to capture it all. As I said, there's no one book for anything. Everything kind of by nature, any road rules, planning laws, if you're in construction, building something, everything contradicts each other. It's just the way it goes, right? So you just got to be able to look forward to a way to achieve it.
So we asked the question why this happened, and you mentioned human nature. And Nick also mentioned how he got in trouble talking about this in the past. I want to touch on human nature. Human nature is no matter how much you want to do good for football, if you don't have that transparency, if you don't have that accountability, then you are going to ultimately make biased decisions, and you won't always know if you're making wrong decisions. That is just human nature. You need that accountability. So I want to ask, how do we prevent this sort of thing happen together? What changes do we need to the governance system to make sure there's better transparency in capital football and better, more guarantee that they have incentives to consult the clubs? What changes do they need to be the structure of how boards are elected or anything like that? I want to throw it open to the floor there. Let's start with Nick.
I've got a little bit of a basic understanding of how this sort of works in capital football. Aaron probably has a bit more of that than me. My understanding is, the board selects these committees who make these reviews, however many people are on them. The board is partly elected by, I think it's a North Standing Committee and a Southern Standing Committee. I can't remember the numbers from what I read, but essentially it's the clubs select a small amount of people who then elect the board and then select these committees. From what I've seen, like I said earlier, there doesn't seem to be a fair representation of all clubs, because as Aaron said, different clubs have different challenges, and by having a small pool of voices to make these changes, essentially you're cutting out a lot of challenges and to address, or a lot of scenarios and solutions. How to fix that, whether that means committees that affect the NPL, for example, should have a representative from each club, maybe, perhaps.
It's an interesting question. How do you kind of prevent it? Because the hardest thing you can do is always look to the past, what didn't work, and try to patch that, because tomorrow's going to be a new challenge you haven't thought about yet. So I think it's just got to be like a lot more dynamic, and there's got to be just a lot more engagement. I'm really lucky. I've got some really, really strong parents and volunteers within our club and our NPLB coordinator. They're very articulate people. They're good people. You know what I mean? They're not trying to pick fights. They're trying to consult. They're getting engaged. They're getting community momentum behind them. And I look at that and go, there's so much people with so much to give in the football community. How do we turn it to a conversation of getting it to a point of just being able to have a conversation, so people can actually raise things and it not have to be a subset of some regulation, because everyone's thinking there's an argument to have. It's not that at all. I think we just need to learn how to have a conversation, to be able to raise things and really turn into a two-way dialogue, so that that engagement's there, so everyone's on board and singing the same thing. So I think, and again, like, that's without, I know this is a football podcast. I think it's a bit more about society today. We're a bit too bad about being able to have a what I call a slightly awkward conversation, because sometimes conversations have to be awkward, or a little bit uncomfortable, where I know everyone likes all this structure to kind of, just look to that to point the finger. And this is not about capital football. This is just saying in general. So until we kind of start to break down those barriers and get more two-way dialogue, it's not going to happen. So, more people on committees, more representation. You look at AGMs of most clubs. I'd love to be a fly on most most AGM meetings because some of them probably do nothing. It's like a 30-minute formality over a few beers, but I'm lucky, at our club, we get quite a few people who attend them and you have conversations, what's the vision? Where are we going? Who's doing what? Who wants to volunteer? What assets do you have? What can you contribute? That's really what we should be doing with Capital Football, and all clubs should be doing with their states.
Look, I think all of us can agree that, dialogue is so important, especially in football, with it being run as much as, let's be honest, modern football is a business. So I think it is important that there is heavy dialogue and stuff like that. And look, I think we can all take a great lesson from this in how a relatively niche story has sort of captured the hearts and captured the minds of a lot of Australian football fans. And, let's hope for the sake of everything that it does get sorted out and that Ugali comes out of the other side. But is there anything we can really learn from this? I'll put this up to Aaron and then Nick if you have anything as well. But is there any sort of lesson that we should be learning from this about, what mistakes were made here that we shouldn't be making going forward? Not just in Capital Football, but I guess in Australian football in general.
Yeah. If I probably start off on that one, I just think we've got to stop isolating regulators from clubs. I think we just need to build the connections more. We need to discuss. We need to be open about our challenges. Yeah, everyone's got them, right? Like we've all got them. No club is perfect. No club meets all the criteria. It's just the way it's been. It's the way it's always going to be. So I think we just need to be much more open about everyone's challenges. And look, Capital Football has been meeting with us recently, which is great to start to kind of listen to what we have to say, and I think everyone just needs to learn how to have a conversation again. It's a bad thing the way our society has been trending the last kind of multiple years, where you can't have a conversation because it's people are either coming across too offensive, or they are being offensive, or people take things that across the other line offensive. But I think what everyone's got to learn to do now is, if you've got to work with people, you've got to work with clubs, or you've got to work with federations, you've just got to have conversations, and you can't avoid it. And you try to avoid it, and all you're going to get is disengagement. You've got to bring everyone back to the table and start to re-engage. And if we're never going to do that, we're not going to do that well enough, then there'll be continue to be problems for both of them. This is a problem for the federations and for the clubs. So that's my biggest thing we would love to stress to try to stop it from happening again.
And Nick, you were, when you tried to start this conversation, I believe you were not greeted with much of a warm welcome, if I understand it correctly.
Yeah, in a sense. I was going to say, Aaron's touched on, dialogue is important. And, I've heard from, within Monaro, meetings with Capital Football recently, discussions with even the council, and putting motions in place to have those dialogues. It's been happening a lot in a good way for them, and I'm actually very happy that those discussions seem to be finally happening. I've tried to bring up these sorts of discussions in the past. Again, from my background, it's, more Riverina based and touching on issues that, fans or supporters or volunteers from that Griffith Wagga area have noticed with the review. I touched on, the travel before, that's cited as a main reason for cutting out these clubs. But the review brings up, let's travel to Wollongong twice a season for a pre-season, cutting the NPL boys from 14 to 10 teams, but also saying that the youth level should have a longer season, because that's where they need the development, which, more teams and more players would give that longer season. I touched on the perceived conflict of interest, and, I've put these sort of things on social media. Have some clubs spoken bit too harshly or antagonistic about it? Sure, I don't think I have. But on the day the final review was announced, I think I was probably one of the louder voices in Canberra speaking out about this review. And on the day that the final exemptions were announced, I was blocked by Capital Football without any notice. They bandied about, I guess, their social media policy and how that's enforced, but it doesn't seem that they appear to stick to it. Whether that's because they were afraid of these sort of awkward conversations, I'm not sure. But when I reached out to them to discuss, hey, why has this happened? I'd like to know why this has happened so I can address these issues in the future. I was just met with as a sign of goodwill, we'll let you speak on our channels now. As a supporter, you're not subject to our social media policy, which I found a bit interesting, given what the social media policy actually says. It gives that perceived lack of transparency. That's how the Riverina clubs feel from what I've spoken to them. And they feel like they haven't been heard. So I'm glad that Monaro, when, you know, they've had this issue, they're actually getting these conversations, because hopefully that means that they are heard and they do have these measures put in place that they can meet these criteria and can continue to do the good things that they do in Queanbeyan, in Canberra and the wider region.
Yeah, so in my experience in football in Australia, there's not a single person I met who isn't passionate about the game, that isn't willing to make personal sacrifices for the game, whether that's in government or volunteers. And yet there seems to be so few which seem to be happy with how our game is governed, the degree of how much people are consulted, the degree of transparency, and how criticism is received. So there is a lot to talk about, a lot to think about, and we do hopefully need to improve in these areas as a football community. Let's hope we do just that. If you have any thoughts on this, please join us on the forum at greenandgoldfc.com. We're also on Twitter, YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Please remember to hit that like and subscribe button. Don't forget to just give us a comment on whether you agree with something or disagree with something you heard on the pod. Until next time, that's all we have time for. Is bye for now.